Hello and welcome to another episode of A View from the Top. I'm Adrian Cropley. A View from the Top is a regular podcast from the Centre for Strategic Communication Excellence, where I interview some of the world's leading communication professionals as we explore their career journey. Today's guest is a true gentleman and an all-round nice guy. And I'm not just blowing smoke. Ask anyone who has interacted with the lovely Howard Krais. It's no surprise then that the consultancy has recently formed, joining forces with Anne-Marie Blake, one of our previous guests on A View from the Top, is called True, which supports organizations in employee engagement and experience. Howard is an award-winning employee engagement and change communication leader with over 25 years of experience, working globally at the heart of major organizations. Before he co-founded True, he was the head of employee experience for Johnson Matthey and has worked in senior communication roles for organizations like GSK and Ernst & Young. Always on top of leading high-level corporate roles, there was a community man at heart for sure, which saw him lead IABC UK as a chapter president from 2018 to 2020 and even chair of the National League Football Club, Wealdstone. He's been involved on many committees in our profession and community. You certainly get a picture of the genuine nature of Howard and why he does the work that he does. So it's no surprise to me that he's been working on some amazing research on listening with Kevin Ruck and Mike Ponsford, which has informed a book that will release later this year or in 2024. And I remember chatting to Howard about this study way back at the Bahrain conference. So I'm excited that his book is actually coming along. Welcome, Howard. And how's the book going?
Thanks, Adrian. Great to be here. Yeah, the book's coming along. We're due to finish all the writing this month by the end of June. So then I believe there's a sort of a 6-month process with the publisher. And so we hope that it will hit the shelves early part of next year.
That's fantastic. We'll have to get all three of you on and we'll do a special podcast when the book gets released. But how did that all start, the listening? And I call it the listening project, but how did that start?
Yeah, well, you mentioned the Bahrain event. That was probably after a year that we'd been doing it, and probably after we published the first report. It was the previous year's IABC EMENA conference, which took place in Copenhagen.
Yeah.
So that's been 5 years ago, I think. Mike Klein actually was one of the organizers, and I think he was the president of EMENA at the time. And he organized this open space event that took place, which some people will know what open space is, but basically where you can speak about anything and people join different conversations. And I wanted to talk about listening. It just was something that was in my mind that as communicators at that point, it was really focused on communicators really not listening to audiences, which was a huge worry because what I was beginning to see was people, communication professionals who were not getting out of their head offices, not going and really meeting their audiences to understand, what was on their minds, what was the things that they wanted to know about, they were talking about, or how they were interacting with the communication materials that were being sent out from these organizations. And so it felt to me that if communicators weren't listening, how could you actually create content and help the organization to actually move and change and develop? So that's where it started from. And Mike and Kevin came to that conversation, joined that conversation in Copenhagen. We came back to the UK and we had some further discussions and agreed we thought there was some work that we could do in this. And we thought, well, we'll do a very sort of small scale research project with just people we knew in our network. That led to the first report. And we probably didn't see it go much further than that, but then the way that was received, we talked about that in Bahrain, as you mentioned earlier. And then we went on to do 3 other reports, one on a big survey, which we did together with IABC globally. And we did a best practice piece and we did something else on as results and focus groups. And then we thought, bringing all this together, the next obvious thing was to write a book. And that's what we're doing. And I think one final thing on this, maybe 2 final things, is that this is a topic which I think is one of those topics which is really now of its time. Yeah. The number of people that you see online talking about listening in different ways is way more than when we started. So that's really heartening. And I see different reports or different events or different things that people are beginning to talk about this. And I've seen 1 or 2 strategies and approaches to listening published, which are very encouraging. But the second point is that it's still a topic which really resonates with people. And clearly, one of the things we saw in our research is that companies all talk the talk, but they don't actually then do what they say is important. So, most people say, yeah, this is really important, but they don't have the processes and systems to actually properly listen and respond. Listening's a leadership thing. It's not just a communication thing.
Yes, that's right. I mean, it really is that leadership skill. We often put it down to communication, as we say here in the center, is the two skills that people really need is to listen really well and to ask really good questions. And it's interesting, when you started that research, it was all pre-COVID. It was already an issue. Was it really to do with the overload that was happening in terms of our very busy and noisy communication channels, and people are just not taking the time to connect with others?
That's where we started from. And I don't know that that's changed very much. I have this sort of negative sense, I guess, that, there's too many comms folks who have really busy to-do lists and very powerful bosses, and find it very difficult to maybe do the things that intuitively they know that they should be doing. But what I think that the damage that does, if you're just delivering content without really thinking about it, is you just create noise. And there's a lot of research which says, how little sometimes organizations are actually getting cut through. So, I think for me, this is one of the key reasons for it.
Yeah, look, and I think this is just such an incredible topic to explore. No wonder it's ending up in a book. And it's for leaders, communication professionals, I think it's just such a big topic to understand, unpack, and then apply some really good listening techniques. Because I think that reconnection of people, certainly post-COVID, we've had this kind of polarizing effect that's happening too, which we've seen through the Edelman Trust Barometer research. I think topics like listening and building actual skills in listening, I think, is going to be absolutely critical for the future. So thank you for doing that work. And I really can't wait till the book's released. I'm looking forward to getting into that one and reading it. So I'm going to keep connected with you, Howard, until that book comes out.
Yeah, it's very exciting. The whole process is exciting. And I have to pay tribute to Kevin and Mike, who've done a lot of the heavy lifting on it. But it's been a great team performance, I think, all the way through, three of us with all our own careers and what have you. So, it's fun. It's been a great experience to do this.
Certainly look forward to it. You've worked in a number of roles. You've got to the senior levels within organizations and managed teams of people. Let's take you back to where this all started for you. Where did your career start? What were some of the first jobs you did that's kind of led you to where you are now?
My first ever Saturday job was in a supermarket, and I managed to break my wrist on the first day as I left that supermarket. And to their credit, they didn't say, well, thanks a lot, goodbye. They gave me a couple of weeks off, and then I came back and they put me in the greengrocer, the fruit and veg area. And why that was quite formative, right early on, age 16 or so, was that you were dealing with customers directly. So I think, first of all, that formed some sort of thoughts in terms of service, in terms of customer service, how you work with people, supporting people in the retail environment. That was quite formative. And then when I came out of university, I guess, just again, because of other summer jobs I'd done, it seemed that my career was probably heading towards some sort of finance role. And so I got a graduate job at NatWest Bank, one of the big banks in the UK. And one of the things that it was a graduate scheme, and I worked in a very big branch in Piccadilly, right in the heart of London. But it taught me that I didn't want to be in banking, and it just wasn't for me. There's just nothing that really excited me about banking. But the good news about NatWest was that I managed to move from the bank environment to a marketing role, and then from a marketing role to an internal marketing role, and then from there, just because of being in the right place at the right time, and perhaps a bit of performance, into this sort of new area, which I guess we would today call change transformation.
Yeah.
NatWest was one of the first companies that I could see, and we're talking the 90s here, who really embraced this sort of complete organizational transformation based around customer, had some real visionary people working there. My first role in that environment was actually on performance management, and we were putting into place the balanced scorecard, which is pretty old now.
That takes me back.
Exactly. But I think, again, one of the first big companies to really start to look differently at the performance measures within the bank. There's a lot of resistance to it. So again, you were dealing with change and how do you overcome resistance? And then from there, via a very interesting sort of step to one side, because we had a bit of terrorism in London at that time, and there was some bombs in the city of London, and the NatWest Tower where we were working got badly damaged. So I was sort of co-opted onto to look after an area which we called the decontamination zone, which sounded very grand.
Yeah.
But basically where contents from the bank, from the tower, this is a 45-story building or whatever it is, and where all the contents, desk contents, filing cabinet contents, everything had to come out in crates. We took it out to this centre we had in North London, where basically I was the one person in charge of about 120 contractors who were moving crates from one place to another. We had to have logistics in terms of what was coming in, what was going out, and that was a fascinating sort of month of leadership and planning on the job and project management. So that was, again, some really interesting skills which to learn very quickly, which I didn't necessarily think, I hadn't planned to do. I
think we learn quickly when we're put on the spot in crisis, right?
You do. And I look back on that bizarrely as a very exciting time. I know the circumstances are not exciting, but in terms of learning, in terms of, having to do something in the moment, there was no 6 months worth of planning going into that. So that was really interesting. And so in a sense, my profile was quite high at that time, and I had some options as to where I was going to go next. And as part of the change, communications was one of those areas. And so that's what I chose to do. And I worked with the leader of that was a guy called Malcolm Groves, who was my sort of first, big mentor figure in comms, and learned so much from him. He basically challenged everything. He was like this guy that you would make a statement, he'd say why. And he just really taught the importance of challenging, of really understanding, of really being clear. I studied history at university, and the good thing about history in a sense was it asked you to do the same thing. Don't trust what's written, just make your own mind up, just ask why. And I think for a role like a communications career, to be able to really be clear in your mind why something is what it is and is so important if you're going to communicate that to someone else. So these were really important skills at that sort of early stage. I went to the bank, and I was given responsibility for the bank's output of video, and I hadn't got a clue what I was doing.
We've all been there, Howard. You kind of go, okay, new skill. Let's get that one developed.
Absolutely. Well, we were doing like monthly magazine programs, at least monthly at that time, plus everything else. So that was fun and great to awaken your sort of creative sense as you were working with some really good, top video people. And you needed to realize, hold on a minute, I'm the guy who's responsible for this for the bank. So I can't let them just dictate everything to me. And you needed to start to really learn quick. The other thing that I had responsibility for was the bank's feedback channel, what we called the hotline. Right. So we had the chief executive's voice, welcome, thanks for calling, leave your message, and we'll respond in 24 hours, which was, again, new at that time. And a few months in, there was a bit of a pay dispute, and the unions, I remember, really instructed all their members to use the hotline to register how they felt, which was almost like giving a great sense of approval, from the unions. And so this was really established as a popular channel, and was a great learning again in terms of listening, as we were talking about earlier, and feedback and how you responded to that. And so, really important for me, I suppose, those experiences very early on in my comms career.
And it was good to get a bank under your belt as well, because I think, being the bigger entities that they are, you gain an awful lot of experience. And it sounds like you had a great mentor in there, and that's how we learn and develop. I think that's been key in your career, as you've had great mentors in your jobs. So from banking, where did you go then?
Well, and then I made a complete sort of right turn. So NatWest UK, I think NatWest Group was bigger, but obviously it was much bigger, but the UK bank was about 55,000 people at that time. And I left and went to a video production company where I was like the third person. So I went from big to small very quickly. And again, just great learning. We had 3 years there and just how to act in a small business, because when you're in a big company, especially at that time in a bank, a lot of systems were not very efficient. Everything moves slowly. Decision-making could be quite slow. Yeah. When you go into a small business, this sort of realization that you didn't have time for all that. Yeah. You just had to get on and make things happen and deliver. And again, that sort of customer approach, creativity, working with some really great people. I'll tell you a story, Adrian, in terms of the difference between the two. In the 1990s bank culture, if you put an expenses claim in, then it probably needed to be signed in triplicate and sent off to some faraway place, and you get paid eventually. And they check and double check to make sure if you put a mileage claim in that it was the right amount of miles. And, there's that culture of almost, absolutely not trusting you. And when I first put an expenses claim in, when I went to the video company, gave the bookkeeper my form and sort of turned to walk away, and she said, hold on a minute. And she wrote me the check out there and then. And the point being, we haven't got time not to trust you. And that point, so this notion of trust was probably a really important one very early on. And you mentioned Edelman and when you look at employee experience, employee engagement these days and the role that trust plays, and again, that comes into the listening piece.
And doesn't it go a long way? Yeah, it goes such a long way when you feel trusted in an organization. And they did that out of necessity. You're a small organization. You can't afford huge processes. But if I put the trust in the person that I've employed to do what they need to do, and they're giving me the expense claim, do it, sign it off, and it's done. I mean, I felt that when I first started in my own business is it's out of necessity. You do it, but you realize you've got the right people around you, and you see their reactions to going, oh, wow, like this just happens. And, I feel trusted and I feel supported.
It's fundamental, I think, these days. And because I think in a lot of different places in society where trust has broken down, we are cynical as well. And we get that, I think, from what's happening around us, political situations and so on. So and as well as organizations, we get that because people, we talk about authenticity these days and rightly so, because we know when someone's being overly positive. We know when someone's not telling us the truth. We know that, someone's being too paternalistic or patronizing in some respects. And, as employees, we don't respond well to that, but we do respond where someone levels with us, when someone's honest with us, when they trust us. So that, to me, trust is absolutely essential if we want to deliver change successfully these days.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's absolutely critical for engagement of people to have that trust, given the context of society today. I mean, let's face it, there's businesses being grown out of scamming, right? So it's a very scary world that we're living in, where people think it's great to go to work because they're going to be ripping people off for the day. And that's, there's a place now in our world and society to try and change that context. And I reckon that could be another topic for another day. But it's thinking about your career. So from video production, where did you go to next?
I went back in-house and I went first to a recruitment company where I was their first internal comms person, which was really interesting because that sort of, it was a high street recruitment company, and it was, very much sort of, sales, but real sort of sales now, tough people. Yeah. One of the things I owned there was the recognition process, which was very in a recruitment world, because these guys, they wanted to be seen as amongst their peers as winners. And so, but again, just not running a recognition process, but how do you tell the stories off the back of that? How do you show the attributes that make good salespeople, make winners. So that was fun. But then that led to going to totally different direction again, to a law firm called
Wow.
Eversheds. Eversheds had been a number of regional firms around the UK, had in essence merged to create one big national firm, probably international, with some international offices. And that was quite sort of different counterculture. Another great chief exec or managing partner, as it was called, a guy called David Ansbro, who really gave me confidence that, you've been hired to be our comms person. So, you need to lead, and you need to have an opinion on these things and have a way of doing things. And that really got me into doing some very counterculture stuff in that fee paying environment, because to suggest that we wanted to get people to start to do what we called, have conversations and take people away from just doing fee paying work.
Yeah.
It was not a natural thing in a law firm.
No, because it's 6-minute blocks, isn't it? Or something like that.
Exactly. So we were able to do some very different things, and it was a very exciting time. Not my mental picture of what a law firm was at that time, and a very exciting few years actually, because we were doing stuff that no other professional services firm was able to do. And again, building trust, building two-way feedback, building conversation, having some fun with it as well. So I think people were enjoying being, what we were trying to do, communicate in a very human way.
And it's just lovely to see that in a law firm, and how progressive, which is fabulous.
Again, it's as you said earlier, that theme of having great bosses and great mentors and people. I worked with two. David Ansbro was there for the first 3 years, and he was succeeded by a guy called David Gray. And David Gray was someone I'm still in contact with today, many years later as a friend. He was very challenging because he never worked with communications really properly before. So he really wanted to understand the value it was going to deliver. And so I had to almost like re-interview and because he wasn't sure what this role was about. And once he'd sort of been persuaded and was able to give it a chance again, we did some really interesting different things. I remember some conferences we ran for the partners, which really took people to a different place in terms of their thinking of what was possible, and both from a creative perspective as well as a business perspective. So it was a really fun time.
Brilliant. And then from there, was that when you moved into Ernst & Young, or?
Before EY, I left Eversheds, and actually at that point tried to set up my own business, and went to business with two other people, and that sort of worked for a year or so. And again, a lot of learnings as to why it didn't go for longer in terms of the work you've got to put in up front, I think, in terms of what you believe and what you're prepared to do for the business. So we left on good terms, and then I did, some contract work for a while. And then I was sort of trying to work out which direction to go. And I saw this role at EY. And again, I was able to take advantage of working with some brilliant in two bosses, actually. This was a new part of Ernst & Young, and this was an opportunity to work with part of EY where they were globalizing all of the back office functions. And that's something that these days we take for granted, I think, in a lot of companies. But in professional services, in one of the big four firms, that had never been done before. And that was a huge journey to take. And so there was a guy from Australia, actually, called Tim Eddy, who came across to the UK. And I knew I had met another lady called Barbara Davis, and Barbara was head of comms for EY, and she basically offered me the job, and Tim offered me the job. But Tim said to me, come in, spend the first 5 or 6 weeks getting to understand the business, and then come back to me and tell me how many people you're going to need. And so I said, okay, great. And I did that, and then came back to him and said, well, maybe 5 or 6 people, maybe a maximum of about 8, I think, and thought 8 would be at the sort of pushing it stage. And he said, and I drew a dotted line to some other folks, and he said, well, why wouldn't you just have all of these people in your team? And what happened, because one of the first things that EY had globalized was the IT function.
Yeah.
They sort of hoovered up in that about 35 different communicators. And these were like technical writers and channel managers and people doing a whole range of jobs, some of which were on the fringes of what we might see as a internal corporate communications type role. And so suddenly, instead of having 6 to 8 people, I had 40 people, of which about 35 were in a place called Secaucus, New Jersey.
Yeah.
And that took me into a totally new realm, particularly around leadership. And what a learning that was, in terms of suddenly not being the communicator advising the leader, but being the leader of this team. I never expected at that point to have a team of 40 people. And that was a really brilliant opportunity to learn around, leadership and how you wanted to be, especially because we needed to, the team that I inherited was not, if I'm honest, was not the team that I needed, because what I needed was a team of change comms, globally minded change comms experts. And that's not what I inherited. So we had to do, quite a significant piece of restructuring. And again, as the leader now, not as the communicator. As the communicator, it's easy. We've all been there and we've sort of whispered
exactly.
Of the leader and say, you've got to be visible. You've got to be, here's all the great principles you've got to, that make for dealing with a sort of a redundancy situation in a good way. And suddenly I was that leader, and you realize it's not so easy,
That's right.
Because there was a moment where I thought, I could hide in London for about 3 or 4 months and do the work here and then suddenly reappear with the answer.
Yeah.
And I really had to say to myself, do I work via the easy way because I was busy, I had other work to do, or do I actually do work according to my principles? I think, the principles that as a communicator you would have, I had to go that way. And so I was commuting to New York, probably at least once, if not more than once a month, and being very visible with the team and led them through that. And it was, again, the sort of, I think when you're as you're sort of going on your career as a communicator, if you get the chance of having real leadership opportunities, leadership roles, you must take them, because it's one thing to advise a leader. It's another thing to have had that experience and then the value that gives you.
Yeah.
And you mentioned the role at the football club, for example. Yeah, I was 9 years as a chairman of a reasonably sized football club, and everyone's voluntary there. No one's got a paid role apart from the players, actually. So again, that's really testing your leadership and how you get things done in that voluntary environment.
When you get those opportunities come up, it sees them and go, what am I going to learn from that, from me as a leader in these roles?
Yeah, I've always believed everything you do is just a sort of, the gateway to the next thing that you do to some extent. Everything that you do, you learn and you develop and you learn more. And I think you really got to be in that mindset of saying, how am I going to develop as an individual? What is this role? What is this opportunity going to give me that I haven't had before? And how can I take advantage of that? Because certainly in my career, when I look at it, every role I've learned something, and, all of those learnings helped me to where I am today, for sure.
It's a little bit like the analogy of you travel through life with almost your Santa sack, right? And you're just filling it with the gifts that you get in the different roles and the people that you are gaining those experiences from, to the point where you get to a part in your life you go, well, I've had such a diverse background and a diverse opportunity in working in all these different companies. And you're so thankful for sometimes the risks that you take in maybe starting your own business and it didn't go as well as you expected, or stepping into a big role where you felt out on a limb or out of your comfort zone, and then you learn from that. But I was reflecting as you were talking about Tim Eddy in EY, and you and I had chatted last week, but I didn't mention to you, I actually worked with him in EY in Australia. So before he left for the UK, one of my jobs with EY was actually managing their relocation change nationally. So we put together what was called a national workforce strategy, and it was about designing the office to be more communicative. So the whole strategy was around, how do people work? How do they interact? What are the touch points in where they communicate? And so this is going back quite a number of years, actually. And the design drove the fit out for the office and the amount of rooms and offices and client areas and all of those things. But Tim Eddy was one of the senior partners at that time. So when you mentioned his name, I went, so he went to London after that.
He said something once which really stuck in my mind. And it was an astute comment from someone who Centre just dropped into this situation. We were doing that thing that, I talked about, that globalizing back office functions. And part of that in a professional services environment is each of the country practices is their own legal entity. So it was more than, you couldn't just say from the centre, right, we're going to do this, and everyone falls into line, because everyone sort of feels that they have some ownership and has a voice.
Yeah.
And one of the things that he realized, being in Europe and traveling a bit around Europe with our European colleagues, he said that, you realize that over the last 100 years, which might sound like it's a long time, but in the course of history, it's not that long a time. In the last 100 years, most of the people we're talking to have been at war with each other.
Yes.
And now we're trying to get everyone to play nicely together. And whilst everyone's mindset is to play nicely and to get on, and, we've got to go through various change processes, you understand that there's different cultures, different histories, different family ties, which all inform people. And I think, again, EY was where I sort of really learned the difference, I think, between being a global organization, which many companies are. EY certainly was a global organization, and having a global mindset. And, really beginning to sort of see the differences that are to be welcomed and not to be sort of dismissed.
Yes.
But, and to work through in terms of how you can work together. And so understanding different cultures, different ways of working. I talk a lot now how one size doesn't fit all. And yet a lot of what you see coming out from organizations just assumes perhaps a UK centric or US UK centric approach, just, sort of dropped on the rest of the world. And that can't work, in my opinion. So it was really at that moment you began to learn what a global mindset meant, and the curiosity and interest that you need to have to act across borders, it was a really important lesson.
And it was so much more than just diversity and inclusion. It was very much around really stepping into understanding those markets around the world when you're a global organization. And I even found between Australia and New Zealand, when I was working on one of the regional strategies with Ericsson, it's just those sensitive times of communicating, as being aware of time zone, being aware of national celebrations, and all of those things that kind of go, it's a whole different mindset, and you've just got to be able to step into the mindset of the audience, the employees in those different areas. It's interesting working in a global organization, and given the experience you've had in the different organizations, this is where it's come home to roost, I guess, in now developing your new business. And, I really wanted to explore that. I know we're getting toward the end of our time together, but I really wanted to explore True. And what was the catalyst for bringing that together and starting to work with Anne-Marie Blake?
Yeah, so after EY, I went to GSK, another big company. I learned huge amounts there in terms of, you realize in these big companies how they are at the forefront of culture, of so many things that you have at your disposal, resources. Even if you feel that resources are being constrained, you still have resources. And when you go to smaller businesses, you realize how lucky you are in these bigger businesses. You've got too many good things. And I was there for 3 years, again, worked with some brilliant people there, and then I took some time to really think, what do I want to do next? And actually what I wanted to do then, to go somewhere where I could start up a comms function again, was something I'd really enjoyed doing. So in terms of, took a step back in terms of things like salary and grade and that type of thing, to go to Johnson Matthey. And I was their first comms person in their clean air division, which was the majority of the business. And clean air was all about, we were world leader in the very exciting area of catalytic converters, which is very exciting if you don't really take too much interest in science. But actually, in terms of the climate crisis, cleaner air is the fundamental thing. So it was a really interesting place to be. But the business had grown on changes in regulation and law, across the world many times over, and leading to new science, new technology needed over 40 years. But again, a big time of change. A new CEO, a lady called Joan Bracker, came in towards the end of 2019. And we knew that we needed to change because the market was changing around us and the company wasn't in the best shape. And so we went through big transformation. We changed, new strategy, new organization, new processes, new systems, went from sort of regionally based to globally based. It's a lot of change there. And we were 17 sites, 6,000 people or so. So that was good. And I was given the, really trusted, use a word that we used earlier, to develop the comms approach. And I think Joan recognized, that not bringing people with you was a big risk in a change. And so again, conversation-based program, which we called Airtime, we developed, and it was a huge time investment, and I think hugely successful to bring people along the journey with us through this time of change. And I had a great time, because I was really, I think, working with an inspiring boss, but given the sort of tools to do what I thought were the right things to do. And I really enjoyed that time. But that was a team. I was a team of one at that to start with a bit of agency support.
Yeah.
And I guess when Joan left and the company as a whole, not so much our part of the business, but the company as a whole, had some trauma at the end of 2021, I guess. And last year was a difficult year. And you start to think, right, where are you going to go next? And I was a bit, I probably always had this itch that, when I'd started my own business, though I never quite did what I wanted to do. And I knew where I'd gone wrong. I knew some of the decisions. I mean, we all make decisions which are not the right decisions in the end. I always say you've got to look at yourself and say, was it the right decision with the knowledge that you had at the time, not with subsequent hindsight? And so I wanted to have another go at that. And I was a bit bored with being in a corporate, things going a particular way, and then things happen around you, which have nothing to do with you. Other people leave. Your sort of, areas where you're influencing, you either got to go back to the drawing board or whatever. So I just felt I'm done with corporates now. And Anne-Marie and I have known each other for years, and we sort of joked that we worked together, and we were probably both on the same path and wanting to start something up. And almost this time last year, Anne-Marie and I are both in New York for the conference. And so we spent quite a bit of time talking about this. And then we came back to London and said, look, we need to decide either we're going to do it or we're not going to do it.
Yes.
Let's give it a go. When we decided that last summer, we sort of thought, we mapped out that maybe next February would be a good start point, because we had various things we needed to get in place first. And 8 months goes very, very quickly. So we launched officially at the end of February, and we're now in our 4th month, and it's very exciting.
It's exciting to see the two of you working together. I admire you both greatly, and I've spent time with you and Anne-Marie independently. And I think it's great that the two of you have got together and are running with this. And I think you came up with the right title for the business, because, all I hear from both of you is authenticity and being true to yourself, being true to the organizations that you work with, and building that in organizations.
Yeah. I'll let you into a little secret that I'm terrible at naming things. It's not a strength of mine at all. People always go, "Oh, the comms person, they name something." I think, "Oh no, I'm not good." But I was just reading a novel actually, and it was called True Story. And I was reading it, and I thought that could make a really good name for a company.
Yeah.
And so that's where it came from. And I think exactly as you say, what we're trying to do is to talk about employee engagement, experience, change, transformation comms, all the usual things, diversity, inclusion comms, but from what we're calling a people-centric approach, and I think most people talk about that, and then you see what organizations really do, and what they do in reality is CEOs will all say, people are our most important asset.
Yeah.
But the reality is, that you see most comms programs, change programs, or whatever, have a leader-centric approach, a head office-centric approach, but they rarely put their people first.
That's the giveaway words, isn't it? We'll say it, but we don't really believe it.
If we do believe it, we haven't got time, or every organization has to work at pace. That's the new phrase, I think, at pace. And I think that people think we haven't got time to do the things that are actually important to do. So I'm trying to, what I want for Anne-Marie and myself to do is to make a stand and say, if we do it properly, actually, we can make it successful. If you don't do it properly, we can see the stats.
Yeah.
McKinsey says 70% of all transformations don't deliver what they promise.
Correct.
That's a huge number.
Huge.
And they list the second reason they list is because you don't bring your people with you.
Yeah.
So it's not, we know this. So hopefully we can, help to do things differently. That's what we'd like to do.
Well, I have no doubt the two of you will working together. It's a great, great team. And thank you for sharing your career with me today, Howard. It's been great having you as a guest.
Thank you, Adrian. It's been a pleasure. Absolute pleasure.
Terrific. Well, I will say thank you. And thanks to everybody for joining us on today's episode of A View from the Top, and look forward to connecting with you next time. Stay tuned to A View from the Top. All the best, everyone.